Earlier this week, I released a podcast episode with the brilliant Jason Voyvich, the author of Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress, and it was one of the most interesting and fascinating conversations I have ever had. I'm going to link that episode down in the description if you guys want to check it out. But we talked about the Roaring Twenties and Prohibition, but more importantly about the consumer revolution and its impact on today's society. And we talked partly about Al Capone and his role in that. So I decided I wanted to make a video to flesh out the story of Al Capone, a man whose name is synonymous with both crime and power. This is the tale of the most infamous gangster in American history. Enjoy the video. In the heart of Brooklyn, New York, during the early 1900s, a legend of the American underworld began his ascent. Born in 1899 to Italian immigrants, Capone was one of 9 children, living in a tenement that teemed with the ambitions and hardships of the newly arrived. These streets were where Capone learned the harsh lessons of survival and ambition, attending school only sporadically before dropping out at the age of 14. It was in these formative years that Capone found a sense of belonging and purpose within the ranks of the 5 Points Gang, a notorious criminal outfit that thrived in the chaos of the early 20th century New York. The gang, named after the infamous 5 Points slum in Lower Manhattan, was a melting pot of criminal enterprise, offering protection, bootlegging, and racketeering services. It was here, among seasoned criminals and burgeoning gangsters, that Capone's innate leadership skills and propensity for violence began to surface. His time with the 5 Points Gang was not just a period of apprenticeship, it was where the raw material of his future self was forged in the fire of street-level crime. He engaged in various criminal activities, from petty thefts to brutal enforcement jobs, honing skills that would later define his reign in Chicago. However, it was not just his criminal activities that shaped the young Capone, it was also an incident that would mark him for life, both physically and metaphorically. The story of how Capone received the infamous scars that led to his nickname Scarface is steeped in the lore of gangland mythos. The tale goes that one night, while working at the Harvard Inn, a bar in Coney Island controlled by Frankie Yale, another gangster and mentor to Capone, Al made a lewd comment towards a woman at the bar. Unbeknownst to Capone, she was the sister of a small-time gangster named Frank Galluccio. Outraged by Capone's disrespect, Galluccio confronted him, and the altercation ended with Galluccio slashing Capone's face, leaving him with 3 deep scars on his left cheek. He attempted to spin tales around them, preferring to say that he got them in the war, referring to World War I, in which he never served, rather than from a barroom brawl. However, the nickname Scarface stuck, much to Capone's disappointment. He detested the moniker, favoring snorky, a slang term for a sharp dresser, which he believed better suited his image as a sophisticated gangster. Capone's early years in Brooklyn were crucial in shaping the man he would become. They were a blend of harsh realities, raw violence, and the first steps towards infamy. Through his experiences in the teeming streets of Brooklyn and the encounter that led to his notorious nickname, Capone emerged as a formidable figure, ready to take on Chicago and etch his name into the annals of American history. These years were not just a prelude, but the foundations upon which the empire of Al Capone was built, setting the stage for his rise as one of the most powerful and feared men in America. However, it was in Chicago that Capone would find his destiny and ultimately leave an indelible mark on the nation. Drawn by the promise of vast opportunities in the criminal underworld, Capone moved to Chicago in the early 1920s, initially to assist his mentor and boss, Johnny Torrio, in managing the brothel business. Chicago, with its mix of industrial wealth and political corruption, presented an unmatched landscape for an ambitious young gangster like Capone. The backdrop against which Capone would rise to power was set by the Volstead Act, enacted to enforce the 18th Amendment, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages in the United States. Rather than curb the nation's thirst, Prohibition created a vast, unregulated black market for alcohol, giving rise to organized crime as America had never seen. Gangs seized the lucrative opportunity, turning the production and distribution of illegal booze into an empire of wealth and influence. With a keen eye for opportunity and a ruthless determination to succeed, Capone quickly moved to expand the empire he inherited from Torrio, who retired after surviving an assassination attempt. Capone's network grew to encompass a vast array of speakeasies, breweries, and distilleries that operated with almost open defiance of the law. It's estimated that at the height of his power, Capone's operations brought in revenues of $100 million a year, a staggering sum even by today's standards. His success was built on a combination of shrewd business tactics, violence, and corruption. Capone had a hand in every level of the illegal booze supply chain, from production to distribution to the speakeasies where Chicagoans came to drink and forget the woes of the Prohibition era. Personal anecdotes from those within Capone's empire paint a picture of a man who was at once a ruthless mob boss and a savvy businessman. Employees of his speakeasies recalled Capone's insistence on quality and customer satisfaction, often visiting establishments personally to ensure they met his standards. In contrast, law enforcement officers tasked with bringing Capone down spoke of the incredible lengths he went to in order to protect his empire, including bribery, intimidation, and when necessary, brutal violence. One former employee, who ran a brewery under Capone's command, recounted how Capone would personally inspect the facilities, making sure the operation ran smoothly and efficiently. Meanwhile, a retired police officer shared tales of frustration, describing how Capone's influence seemed to reach untouchable levels, with judges, politicians, and even members of the police force under his sway. At the zenith of his power, Capone was more than just a gangster. He was a paradoxical figure of American folklore, embodying both the ruthless kingpin of a vast criminal empire and a modern-day Robin Hood to many in the struggling communities of Chicago. Capone's ability to cultivate a public image of generosity and goodwill was uncanny, especially against the backdrop of his illicit operations. He donated to charities, provided for the poor during the Great Depression, and was known to personally help out families in need. This careful crafting of his public persona was as much a part of his vast empire as the speakeasies and bootlegging operations he ran. Through strategic use of the media and public appearances, Capone endeavored to present himself as a benefactor of the people, a man who, despite his methods, sought to help his community in a time of widespread hardship. However, the event that irrevocably tarnished Capone's carefully curated image and intensified law enforcement's pursuit of him was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. In an attempt to eliminate his rival George Bugs Moran, Capone's men, dressed as police officers, lined up 7 members of Moran's gang against a garage wall and executed them. The brutality and cold-blooded efficiency of the massacre shocked the nation and marked a turning point in public perception of Capone. No longer could his acts of charity overshadow the violence and bloodshed he orchestrated. The massacre became a symbol of the lawlessness and corruption that had taken hold in Chicago, and Capone was squarely at the center of it. Around this time, Capone faced personal danger as well. A rival gang, seeking retribution and a larger share of the lucrative bootlegging business, plotted to take Capone's life. The plot was as daring as it was deadly, a barrage of gunfire aimed at Capone's motorcade as it moved through the streets of Chicago. Capone narrowly escaped death, thanks to the armored car he had the foresight to travel in, and his network of informants that tipped him off just in time. This assassination attempt highlighted the perilous nature of Capone's world, where alliances were fragile and violence was a constant shadow. The attempt on his life, coupled with public outcry following the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, signaled a turning tide. Under the growing pressure from the public and the federal government, authorities intensified their efforts to bring down Capone. This was no longer just a battle against organized crime. It was a mission to restore law and order in a city that Capone had an iron grip on. The stage was set for an unprecedented legal and law enforcement onslaught against Capone. Figures such as Elliot Ness and his team of Untouchables would soon enter the fray, targeting Capone's empire not through the gun, but through the ledger, aiming to bring him down for good. As the 1930s dawned, Al Capone's empire, which had thrived on the illicit liquor trade, gambling, and extortion, faced an unprecedented threat, not from rival gangs, but from a reinvigorated law enforcement strategy focused on dismantling the financial underpinnings of his criminal operations. Recognizing the difficulty of convicting Capone on prohibition violations due to the pervasive corruption within Chicago's legal system and police force, the federal government shifted its focus towards Capone's Achilles heel, tax evasion. This strategic pivot was spearheaded by a young, ambitious federal agent named Elliot Ness and his handpicked team, famously known as the Untouchables, for their incorruptibility. Elliot Ness and the Untouchables embarked on a relentless quest to gather evidence against Capone, employing innovative investigative techniques for the time. They raided Capone's breweries and supply routes, meticulously traced financial transactions, and flipped close associates of Capone, turning them into witnesses for the prosecution. Their efforts were not without danger. Each member of the team faced threats to their lives and families. However, their unwavering dedication began to expose the cracks in Capone's empire, revealing a complex web of income that Capone had failed to report to the IRS. The culmination of these efforts was Capone's trial in 1931, a media spectacle that captured the nation's attention. For the first time, the public saw the seemingly untouchable gangster brought to account. In a strategic move to avoid the press, Capone and his fellow mobsters covered their faces during the trial, a futile attempt to dodge the flashing cameras that sought to immortalize their downfall. This act of defiance, however, did little to sway the outcome. The evidence against Capone was overwhelming, thanks in no small part to the meticulous groundwork laid by Ness and his team. When the verdict was announced, guilty of tax evasion, Capone was reportedly stunned. He had underestimated the government's resolve and the effectiveness of targeting his financial indiscretions rather than his more notorious criminal activities. Sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence for tax evasion at the time, Capone's reign as the king of Chicago's underworld was effectively over. His reaction to the sentence was a mix of disbelief and resignation. The invincible facade had crumbled, leaving behind a man facing the reality of his choices. Al Capone's transition from the opulent, power-saturated life of a gangster kingpin to the grim reality of a prison cell marked the beginning of his final chapter. His incarceration began in Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary, but due to concerns over his influence and the special treatment he was receiving, Capone was transferred to Alcatraz. This infamous island prison, designed to hold the most troublesome of federal prisoners, stripped Capone of the privileges he once enjoyed. In Alcatraz, the man who had once commanded an empire faced the monotony and harshness of prison life. Capone attempted to wield his influence among prisoners and guards alike, but Alcatraz, with its rigid discipline and isolation, proved impervious to his charm and power. It was during these years that Capone's health began to seriously deteriorate. Syphilis, contracted in his youth and left untreated, ravaged his body and mind. The disease progressed to neurosyphilis, causing severe neurological and psychiatric problems. Capone's mental faculties declined rapidly. A prison psychiatrist assessed him as having the mental capacity of a 12-year-old child, branding him a middle-grade moron. The once feared gangster, who had been deemed the most powerful man in America, was now reduced to a state of vulnerability and confusion, a stark contrast to the formidable figure he once was. Capone was released from prison in 1939, his sentence reduced for good behavior and the consideration of his deteriorating health. He retreated to his mansion in Palm Island, Florida, where he spent his final years in seclusion, far removed from the public eye and the life of crime he once dominated. Those last years were marked by a profound decline in his health, both physical and mental. Capone was a shadow of his former self, barely recognizing friends and family, his mind lost to the ravages of his illness. Al Capone passed away in 1947, at the age of 48, from a stroke and pneumonia, complications of his syphilis. The news of his death barely stirred the same public that had once been captivated by his every move. Capone's end was that of a man beaten, not by law enforcement or rival gangsters, but by his own frailty and the inevitable toll of his choices. The legacy of Al Capone in the era of Prohibition is a complex tapestry woven with the threads of crime, punishment, and societal change. Once the most feared gangster in America, Capone remains a figure of enduring fascination, symbolizing both the allure and the peril of absolute power. His life story, from the heights of criminal authority to the depths of imprisonment and illness, continues to captivate public imagination, serving as a poignant reminder of the American dream gone awry.
I came to Chicago with $40 in my pocket. My son is now 12. I'm still married and I love my wife dearly. We had to make a living. I was younger than I am now and thought I needed more. I didn't believe in prohibiting people from getting the things they wanted. I thought prohibition was an unjust law, and I still do.
And that is the story of one of the most infamous and fascinating gangsters in American history. If you want to learn more about the society of the Roaring Twenties and the Consumer Revolution and how Al Capone helped orchestrate that, I'm going to link my conversation with Jason down in the description below. I'm also going to link his book, Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress, in the description, and I highly urge you guys to check that out. It is very insightful and very entertaining. If you liked the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button below, and drop your thoughts on Al Capone in the comments. If you want to support the channel, our Patreon is also in the description. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on our next adventure.